Hello, Moog have a new synth. And if you'd like to understand the features, how amazing it sounds, and what it can do by itself and with your modular, watch on. This is the Moog Mavis. Chapter 1. What is Mavis? The Moog Mavis is a complete, semi-modular, monophonic, analogue Moog synth. It's a complete synth, so it has a bit of everything that you need to have fun, but obviously is designed to interface with other things too. Nice, by the way, that the Patchbay is on the left as the other Moog synths Patchbays are on the right. They're designed to sit next to each other, and later in this video I'm going to hook up the Mavis to modules and we're going to have a bit of a jam, so we'll both be covering the bass synth and what happens when you pair it with friends. So if you've been craving a genuine analogue Moog to layer, to sample, to use as your kind of wellspring of sounds and weird little squiggly sound effects, bits and bobs for your songs or bass lines and everything, then Mavis could be it. One quick thing before we move on, which is the Moog Mavis is self-assembled. That is to say, when you get the Mavis, it's a kit. Now, I just want to stress how insanely simple it is because all you actually do is just screw it together. There's no soldering, there's no electronics of any kind. You just need a Phillips screwdriver. And all you do is you just screw the panel to the PCB that's actually got the gubbins that makes the sound with these little screws. You then screw it into the case here with these 4 little screws. Also, this then is how it is a Eurorack module. And then you just screw in the little hex nuts. And all it takes is just a bit of time. So it took me like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, if that. And what's very nice is they give you a little Moog brand nut driver, which if you're a modular synth nerd like me, is quite useful. And also, as a neat little accessory, you get a lid. So you can put this on here and your synth is dust-free. And you can shove it in a bag and take it with you and go to the cafe like they do in adverts. So yeah, it's self-assembly, but I wouldn't even really call it DIY. You just screw the bits in together. It's easy. Chapter 2. What's in Mavis? So Mavis has all of the parts that a subtractive and not so subtractive monophonic analog synthesizer might require. Now, the Mavis is very small, but the sound is not small. And it's the brainchild of Steve Dunnington and also Max Ravitz, aka Patricia, who works for Moog. I think they've worked out a really interesting balance of functions and also tonality. It just sounds really good. And the wavefolder is different to ones that I've heard in other synths, so it's just a lovely sounding thing, like all Moogs. As a general rule, you've got your kind of primary sound shaping parameters along the top row here. You've got your modulation sources along the bottom. That is your LFO and ADSR that you use to manipulate these top parameters. And in the middle are a row of knobs and controls for controlling how you make the bottom layer affect the top layer, in a very, very loose way of speaking. We've got a single oscillator, which can be both saw and square, and you can blend it. It's not just either or, very nice. There is pulse width control of that square. Very nice. You can freely tune the oscillator. If you want to tune it to concert pitch, I recommend you use a tuner. You can get hardware tuners like this little Korg, or of course there are software ones too. There is normaling built in so that we do not have to have patch cables connected to get sound. And there is some really clever built-in routing. And what I especially like are these blendable controls. The modulation sources can be blended as well. You can blend between envelope and LFO for much more expressive things and without needing the use of a mixer, even though there is one provided. We'll get to that in a sec. So I can use the envelope to pulse width modulate, or I can blend between and have a combination of envelope and LFO. Lovely. You also have pitch mod, so you can get vibrato and Daft Punk impressions. The filter is the good old 24 dB Moog ladder. And there's just that ever so slightly kind of burnt acid vibe to this one. There's a switch here, VCA mode, which by the way holds the synth open so that you can use it better as an effects processor. You could be running things through the filter, or you could be running things through the wave folder. Yes, that's right. It has a wave folder, which is fairly bonkers. Now, the wave folder is not patched in by default. You have to use the Patchbay to patch it in. And the way that it works is by tapping something into the fold in, it will disconnect the oscillators, and you then hear whatever you feed the wave folder going into the VCA and filter. So it's a very interesting beast. And if I take the VCO, and I've now connected it so the VCO is running into the fold, and then if I fold it, now you can blend in the square and then fold a mixture of the square and the saw, or just the square, but a square doesn't really fold in the same way, because what a wave folder is doing is literally bending the top back down on the waveform. With a square waveform, there's really nothing to bend down, so it doesn't really work as well. But you can also bend the LFO, and now the LFO can run at audio rates. This is a dual oscillator synth. To make it so that we could hear the LFO, we would patch LFO to fold in, doesn't track the keyboard. To do that, we take keyboard CV out and we patch it into the LFO rate. So now, if we want to have a two oscillator sound with both the oscillator and the LFO audible together, we then have to get into the Patchbay. And that's where there's a couple of extra hidden blocks. There is a 2-input mixer, and it literally has an input called 1 and an input called 2, and it emerges here, 1 plus 2. And there is a level control for the 1. There isn't a level control for the 2, so whatever you plug in just comes out at the same volume that you plugged it into, but there is a separate attenuator. An attenuator is just like a volume knob used to rein in control voltages and audio so that it's a little bit quieter. And then another really cool building block that's in here is sample and hold. And now there isn't noise built into the Mavis, and so the sample and hold circuit by default uses the VCO as its source, and it uses the LFO as its trigger. It will make kind of random voltages, but they'll be pseudo-random because they're using a cyclic source as its sort of sampleable material. Therefore, there's a kind of cyclic nature to the samples, if that makes sense. And finally, there's a mult. So if you made something really interesting with a sample and hold, for example, you could use the mult to give yourself 2 copies of it. And it's also worth mentioning that you get patch sheets, which is to say kind of presets to help you try out some different sounds without you needing to understand kind of how to use a semi-modular or modular analog synth. And there's really, really good documentation as well. There's a bunch of awesome guides, including Patching with Intention, which is a really nice one that teaches you kind of ways to use this Patchbay intentionally and actually giving you some real world examples. This is the kind of thing you can use it for. I'm sure this seems a little bit overwhelming if you're not used to analog synthesizers, but I do think that the Mavis would be a brilliant first synth. There's a lot of building blocks in here. You can do a lot of things, and if you have a bit of modular, and we're going to explore what would happen if you add more modular, then the Mavis just offers a great deal. It's a whole Moog voice in a proper Eurorack module. That's a very cool thing. It's similar-ish to the Mother, I suppose, in a certain regard, but it's a slightly different feature block that you have in it. And so it's a really good complement to something like the Mother, not just an alternative. The nature of modular stuff is the less you have, the harder you have to work. So it becomes interesting and creative to push it around, use these little blocks as best you can. And then, of course, as it grows, this kind of thing can still remain useful. These are absolutely essential building blocks in the pursuit of modular synthesis. And so you may start on something like this, but I really don't see why you would outgrow it because it's always going to be useful. So let's make some sounds. Chapter 3. Mavis makes sound. Delay from the love beams here, but it sounds great. That's the dry. But then we can kind of like morph / blend the LFO wave. So if I do this, we'll get different shapes. And if I get that same blend here, just fold, just the one level. Chapter 4. Mavis goes modular. And so here I have a little bit of modular, which I think would nicely complement the Mavis. Of course, modular is a very open-ended question, so what you think will complement the Mavis might be different to me. But these are some of the things that I thought might be quite nice to play with, namely a Turing machine to sequence it, maths to clock it, add more modulation, a VCA so we can control how things change over time, and a quantizer to quantize it all to musical concert pitch. If that's your bag, perhaps we should give it a little whirl. So I'll run this through the quantizer. In this slightly fruitily tuned example, I'm using the sample and hold circuit to play the Mavis duophonically. So I'm sending the Turing machine into the sample and hold circuit and triggering it differently with this maths gate out here, or this signal which acts as a gate. And then so the VCO is playing one line, and then the LFO is playing a second line, that one that you hear here. And I could fold it. And blend in. What you're hearing here, this little like lilty sequence, is the Mavis's sample and hold circuit after being quantized by this pitch quantizer so that it becomes concert pitch. The LFO is triggering its envelope as well, so you get a nice 16th steady sequence. And I'm also attenuating the sample and hold signal before I send it to the quantizer, so doing constraining it. And because of this phase relationship between the LFO and the oscillator, you get something that is like very like repeating and sort of interesting. Nice. Wicked. Notice how it literally just takes a quantizer to add a sequencer to Mavis. The sample and hold because of the way that it's coupled to the oscillator, really is like a sequencer. An unpredictable one that you can't control to a certain degree, but you can constrain and steer. Nice. Chapter 5, Mavis comes out of her shell. So finally, oh, it's just a Eurorack module. Comme ça. Hey, voila. Here we have a little bit of modular. This would be the 880, the DFAM, and the RIC M185 controlling the Mavis. That's the pitch row of the DFAM controlling the Mavis. this little setup, we've got the Mavis by itself here, but the DFAM is also being controlled by the M185, which the Mavis is too, so that I can feed the 2 oscillators from the DFAM into the Mavis and make a 3 oscillator Moog, which doesn't sound terrible. I've got it turned up here on the levels, and if I turn up the oscillators, double oscillator, that's one, third one, oof. The input does drive quite nicely on here. LFO is free to do other things. What I could do is trigger the sample and hold, and then feed the sample and hold to control the cutoff. Nice. Up to this point, we've just been using square waves on the DFAM and a blend on the Mavis, that's the saw, and we haven't been folding the waves particularly. What if we fold them? What I'll do is I'll switch both of these waveforms to triangle on the DFAM, and that then becomes the perfect type of wave to fold. Oh. Hearing is the DFAM being fed into the fold input. And what you need to know about wave folders is that wave folders kind of do a lot more with less pointy shapes, if that makes sense. So if we were filtering a waveform, like we were taking a square and we were filtering it, and we were sending the very filtered signal in, that's the DFAM, with some delay, by the way, from the love beams. Then by folding it, you end up with something utterly filthy. Nice.